Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is that it's so big, it's in every study. Every
Yeah,
study has to account for the placebo effect. And yet we account for it in a way that minimizes it and hides it as if it's not
I
important.
know. It's like, oh, it's just the placebo effect. I mean, I think it's huge. It's
Yeah,
what do you mean just the?
yeah. I think it's everything, actually. I think it's everything. Um, so, yeah, the placebo effect is essentially when it, a person feels that they will get better, or they think or they believe that they will get better. And by virtue of that, they do. So, classic example is what we call a sugar pill, right? So, we think that a certain antibiotic will kill a bacteria that is causing an infection. And so, you give some people that antibiotic, but if you give some other people a so called sugar pill, or a pill that is inert, that apparently has no active action against that bacteria, just the act of getting a pill from somebody in a white coat who cares about them, to whom they pay a bill because it's valued, just this ceremony that happens itself can create healing in this person, can help the person get better, right? And we can see it even in physical conditions. I believe there was a study for people who had joint pain. I believe it was knee pain, and some of them had actual arthroscopy, where you make an incision in the knee and you go in, look in, and clean it out. And others had sham arthroscopy, where it was blinded. They didn't know. They still had an incision, but nothing went in, nothing cleaned anything out. And the people did just as well. I can email you that. So even when you
Fascinating.
call, like, and something you would consider so quote unquote physical as the bone and the knee, no mind, no mind there. Even in these kinds of cases, we can see the power of that placebo effect, and vice versa is the nocebo effect, right? When we say that nothing is possible, or healing is not possible, if you say that, then many people actually believe that. And a good example of that, which is rampant, is what we call prognosis in medicine today. One of the things I realized in doing the Healing is Possible podcast, where we interview people who have healed from all kinds of conditions, including apparently or supposedly incurable conditions, what I realized is that our prognoses are just plain wrong in so many cases. Why? Because we're not accounting for these stories of healing. Many of these people who healed said, I asked my doctor to write it up, but they wouldn't write it up in the medical journal. Very few of these cases are written up in medical journals. And so when you don't write them up, what can you do? You can say, well, that was a miracle, or well, that was a one-off thing, or well, that rarely happens, or the big one is, well, that's just an anecdote. That's just
Yeah,
anecdotal. As if, I mean, we live on stories.
yeah.
Stories
Oh,
are
there are just 2 million anecdotes.
yeah, right, right. But we don't know that there are 2 million, or they're not documented because they're
Because they're
not
not
printed in the
documented.
medical journals. And so what's happening is that denominator of what can happen is so small. We're not accounting, we're not expanding to all the cases of people who are actually healing in that numerator, right? So what is the percentage of healing? It goes down and down and down and down. And so what we're doing with in making a prognosis is essentially pronouncing a nocebo effect. We're activating a nocebo effect by saying, well, only 20% actually heal from this, or only 1%, or only 70% even. Whereas actually it might be 30% or more, 40, 50, 80, who knows, right? So that's the placebo and the nocebo effect. Now, what does that suggest? This gets into maybe like the overall theme of this conversation. This suggests that the line between the mind and the body is not so concrete, right? This gets back to east, west, mind, body,
Exactly.
spirituality, science,
Yeah.
right? Everybody wants to name the sides, but nobody will name the line, right? That is the line of identity. It is when I take myself to be something, when I identify as something, I create a division between that something and the rest of the world. Okay, so when I take myself primarily as a body, either through direct experience or through repeated ramming a concept in my head, then I create something called body and I create something called mind, right? Why? Only because I identified as body, right? I create a world out there and then myself here. Why? Because I was taught to identify strictly as personality. Because when I was a child, perhaps the parents would say, this is your nose, this is your mouth, this is your hand, this is your knee. And so where was our attention getting focused all the time?
Yeah.
And then when we would name nose, they would say, oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And so this attention gets narrowed. You know, a baby would just crawl straight off the edge of a table. It has not yet identified as that body. I'm not saying we should live like that. I'm not saying that's the other option, but there is a third way other than that, or just identifying as a body, right? If parents would say, oh, I see, Anders, this is ease. This what we're feeling, this is space. This is openness. Every child would understand this. Every child would, but most adults don't understand it, so they don't speak that way. You know? And if we did that, then a child's identity would not get constricted. And then we would not have something called spirituality in this world. You know, because they would just be living that openness.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these are the different ways that we have to look at this as we start looking at this boundary, as we start experimenting with our own identity, then we will go past these dichotomies.